And in most of the advanced world, we now have more people in their 60s than their 50s than their 40s and their 30s. So the whole consumption and production cycles that we've become used to simply are no longer even mathematically possible. And we hit the tipping point this decade. Whole idea of globalization is that anyone can go anywhere at any time and interface with any partner, buy any commodity, ship into any market without needing a military escort. And that was something that was unheard of before World War II. The world used to be imperial. Well, the Americans created globalization, patrolled the global ocean so we could all do all these things. But it came at the cost of subjugating your security policies to the United States for the Cold War. We basically bribed up an alliance, and it worked. But the Cold War ended 30 years ago, and in this last 7 presidential elections, we've gone with the candidate who is less interested in globalization at large, and that includes the shift from Trump to Biden. We are now maintaining a global system that costs money. I mean, patrolling the global oceans, keeping everyone from shooting at one another, that takes effort and time and money. And since there is no longer a security payback from the American point of view, the cost benefit analysis has really changed over the course of the last 30 years. Part of what made globalization work is the Americans would sublimate their own industry to encourage growth abroad. So ultimately, this has worked for us because we design the products, they build them. But some of the countries that are doing the building are now more powerful than they would have been in a deglobalized world. China's at the top of that list, are starting to have their own ideas about how the world should function. And to think that the Americans are going to subsidize the Chinese expansion over the long haul, that they're going to bleed and die so that the Chinese can import food and energy, that's a bit of a reach. And so we're seeing a broad adjustment through both American political parties that are turning against the very idea of an open global system. Second big issue is demographics. One of the many, many unintended side effects of globalization is it enabled people to move off the farm and into the cities where they would participate in manufacturing and services jobs. Well, when you move into town, you have fewer kids because they're no longer free labor. They're more of a luxury good, if you will.
Mm.
You've placed that forward for 70 years, and in most of the advanced world, we now have more people in their 60s than their 50s than their 40s and their 30s. So the whole consumption and production cycles that we've become used to simply are no longer even mathematically possible. And we hit the tipping point this decade.
There no benefit to the American economy through that, though? I mean, we seem to have integrated so much into this idea of globalization.
There's definitely some upsides. It's kept inflation low for 40 years because we had these bottomless levels of Chinese demand that were making manufacturing goods on the cheap. Now that cost us manufacturing jobs, but it did keep the cost of living on a global basis and in the United States lower than it would have been otherwise. The post-Soviet collapse did something similar by dumping oil and nickel and everything else on the global market when their industry collapsed. They could still produce the raw commodities. So from roughly 1985 until roughly 2015, this has been the highlight of globalization. This has been the high watermark, and it's been fantastic. We've seen record economic growth in the world writ large and strong economic growth in the United States as we focus on the things that we have a huge value-added competitive advantage in.
Mm.
But everything is now changing. With the demographic profile shifting around the world, there aren't a lot of young people to do the consuming. And so the globalization process has become kind of a product dumping project for all of the foreign companies that are selling to the United States now. Because our baby boomers did something that no other baby boomers in the rest of the world did. They had kids. So, we can take the crap out of the millennials on a regular basis, and we should. But they've got something going for them that their cadres around the world don't. They actually exist. So American millennials are at the peak of their consumption right now. And in the rest of the world, there's not a whole lot left.
So if we understand that the forces that are kind of created the world we were living in and now are changing and we're transitioning, how does that impact something like supply chains? What's going to happen to the supply chains? We already saw them during COVID broken. There's a feeling that when we rebuild them, when they correct, when we're past COVID, we can sort of push out some of the inflation that we're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, it's
How
nice
much
thought.
is
It's not going to happen.
right?
So each chapter in the book deals with a different economic sector, and the two chapters for transport and manufacturing are very tightly interwoven because most manufacturing these days deals with the creation and the shipping and the addition of value to various intermediate products.
Mm.
That requires a sacrosanct transport system that is cheap, that is secure, and that everyone agrees you just don't mess with. And we have had that from 1985 until 2015, but that is now breaking down. The two big things that are going on in the world right now in 2022, number one is the China lockdown due to COVID because their vaccine doesn't work and because Omicron is the most contagious pathogen we have ever dealt with. We know that we're going to have interruption after interruption after interruption. Shanghai's been shut down for 2 months. They're hoping to reopen in June. We will see. But we know that as soon as they open, the Omicron will come right back, break it down again, and again, China just falls out of the system. The second big thing, of course, is the Ukraine war, and most of the industrial products that the Russians export, they export via the Black Sea, which is now a war zone. And so those have been interrupted. And it doesn't matter if it's oil or nickel or copper or machine parts, whatever it happens to be, it's not as reliable. And these are just two things that are happening right now. When you remove the Americans from maintaining the globalized system, you're going to have that in a lot more places. What's going on in China isn't just going to be about health, it's going to be political. What's going on in Russia isn't just going to be security, it's going to be demographic. And all of these things combined make multi-step supply chains, especially in the Asian space, impossible to maintain. So we are going to have to rebuild industry without them in North America. Now, we've been working on this since the first year of COVID. COVID plus Trump really got people to take this issue seriously. And we're getting shorter supply chains that are closer to end consumers that use less water and less energy and shorter transport links and cheaper labor in terms of productivity. It's a net gain, but you don't double the size of your industrial plant overnight. This is a 5 to 10 year process. And while that is going on, capital's getting dedicated to that, which means it can't be dedicated to other things. And we can't take the full advantage of these new supply chains that are closer to home until they're done. So we have at least another 5 years of high inflation as we struggle through this transition. And there's nothing that government can do to make it better. Now, government can make it worse, but not better.
To watch the full video, check out the link in the description below. What do you think of Peter's thoughts here? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found value in the content, hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.